We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Yud Chesam at Beis Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 118b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara brought the Mishnah which said that during the Mishkan Shiloh, any area which was visible, where Shiloh was visible from that area, Kachim Kalim could be eaten, and the Gemara was looking for a source for this idea, and the Gemara is in the middle of bringing the source of Rav Avdimi Bar Chasa, who says that the source is from the Pasuk V'lo Tanas Shiloh. It says V'lo Tanas Shiloh in Sefer Yehoshua, and we understand that Pasuk to mean Mokom Shekol Haroa. Also, this was a place where anyone who would see it, Mesanech Olav Al Achilas Kachim Shalo, he would groan regarding the eating of his Kachim. The idea is again that this was an area where he used to be able to eat Kachim when the Mishkan Shiloh was there, and therefore he'd be disappointed in this area where the Mishkan Shiloh used to be visible, that he could no longer eat the Kachim Kalim in this area. And Rashi notes, V'lo Tanas Shiloh Chipasta V'lo Mitzase B'Mikra. I looked, I didn't find this exact pasuk. Avol Mitzase V'ovar Mizracha Tanas Shiloh. I found a similar pasuk in Sefer Yoshua. V'ovar Mizracha Tanas Shiloh. And Rashi continues, Tanas Loshan Taniya Vaniya. Again, it's a language of moaning. Shayu Misanchin V'roin Shemisham Hayu Zorchan Achilas Kachim Shahaisu B'Makam Ariso. They were in an area where Mishkan Shiloh was visible, and they would remember when they used to be able to eat Kachim in this area. And the Gemara continues with another source. Rabbi Yavo, Rabbi Yavo says, Amar Krutz, because the pasuk says, Ben Poras Yosef, Ben Poras Ale Oyin, and we darshan that to mean Ayin Shalo Rotzta Lozon Velehonos Midavar Sheino Shalo, the eye, talking about the eye of Yosef that didn't want to get pleasure from that which was not his. That's referring to the wife of Potiphar. So Tizke V'tochel Kim Loineh. So Yosef would merit that one could eat the Kachim Kalim again in any area which is visible to the eye, where the Mishkan Shiloh is visible. Rashi explains Sheino Shalo Eishes Adonav. Again, that's the wife of his master, the wife of Potiphar. Ben Poras Yosef Lashon Pirya V'Ribya. The language of the pasuk is a language of being fruitful and multiply. Makom Achilas Kodshim Nisrabelo. The idea is being fruitful and multiplying, meaning the area, the location where he could eat Kachim was increased for him. Al Yedei Ha'ayin, through the eye. V'Shilo B'Chelko Shal Yosef Haisa, and Shiloh was in the portion, in the territory of Yosef, K'Rechsiv, as it's written, Vayimas Bo'al Yosef, Achar Vayitosh Mishkan Shiloh Ksiv, again, as it's written in the Psukim, and so therefore this is a reference to this idea by Mishkan Shiloh. And the Gemara continues with another source. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina says, Uritzon Shoch Nisneh, also a pasuk by Yosef. It says, Uritzon Shoch Nisneh, and it means Ayin Shalo Ratzta Lehanos Midavar Sheino Shalo, the eye that did not want to get pleasure from something that wasn't his. Again, Tizke V'tochel Bein Hasnuin, is able to merit to eat among those who hated him. Rashi explains, Uritzon Al Yedei Ratzon Shalo Ratza Lizon Mima Sheino Shalo, learning from the word Ratzon, he didn't want to benefit from something which was not his. And Bein Hasnuim, among those who hated him, it means Shiloh, Kadosh of Necholim. What it means is that by Mishkan Shiloh, its Kachim could be eaten, Af Begvule Shar Shvatim, even if you were in the territory of the other tribes, Shesanuhu, that hated him, again, as long as Mishkan Shiloh was visible. And the Gemara continues, Tana was taught, Roa Sha'amru, when we say that Shiloh is visible, Roa Kulo, he has to be able to see the entire thing. V'lo ha'mafsik beino leveino, there can't be anything that is in between. Amar le Rabbi Shimon ben Eliyakim le Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Shimon ben Eliyakim said to Rabbi Elazar, Asabralach, I'll give you an example, I'll explain to you, Kagon Beiknishta de Ma'on, like the synagogue of Ma'on. And Rashi explains, the Bach changes this to Asabralach, I'll explain it to you. Heranech Dugmal Adavar, I'll show you something that's an example of this. Beiknishta de Ma'on, the synagogue in Ma'on. Misham Hayu Rowan as Shiloh, from there one could see Shiloh. V'lo Haya Davar Mafsik, and there was nothing that was in between. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rapapa says, Roa Sha'amra, when it says that it could be seen, Lo Roa Kulo, you don't have to see the whole thing, Ela Roa Mixaso, just to see part of it. And Rashi explains, Lo Roa Eskula, Liros Misham Eskula Shiloh, Ela Mixas, you don't have to see the entire Shiloh, as long as you see part of it. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rapapa asks the following question, Omed Varo, if the person stands and he's able to see Shiloh, but Yoshev Ve'enora, but if he sits, he's not able to see it, what's the halach in that case? Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah asks the following question, Omed Al Gabe HaNachal, if he stands on the stream, by the banks of the stream, Varo, and he could see it, but Besoch HaNachal, but if he's in the stream, Ve'enora, he's not able to see it, what's the halach in that situation? And the Gemara says, Teku, the Gemara leaves these as questions. And the Gemara continues, Kiyasu Rav Dimi Yamar, when Rav Dimi came, he said, in the Shinui and Uschos, takes out the word Rebbe over here. When Rav Dimi came, he said, Bishlosha Mekomos, some have Ba'arba Mekomos, in 3 places, Sharsa Shechina al Yisrael, the Shechina rested upon Klal Yisrael, Beshilo and Shiloh, V'nov V'givon and Nov and Givon, that's counted as 1 if you have the Girsa of 3 places, Ubeso Lavim, and also the Beis HaMikdash, those are the 3 places where the Shechina rested upon Klal Yisrael. Uv'chulan lo Sharsa Ela B'chelik Binyamin, in all of them, it always rested in the portion of Binyamin. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Chofef olav kol hayom, he covers him all day. That's in reference to Binyamin. Kol chafifos lo yehu ela bechelko shel Binyamin. All coverings should own a portion of Binyamin. Ki ozal Abaya omra kami de Rav Yosef. When Abaya went, he said this in front of Rav Yosef. Amar, he said, Chad biro havalei lechaylil. Chaylil had one son. Chaylil was the father of Abaya. The father of Abaya had one son, velo miskan, and he's not proper. V'haksiv, because isn't it written, Vayitosh Mishkan Shiloh, he forsook Mishkan Shiloh. Uchsiv, and it's also written, Vayimas B'yoel Yosef of Shevet Ephraim lo Bachar, he despised the tent of Yosef, he did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, and these psukim indicate that the Mishkan Shiloh was actually in the territory of Yosef, it was not in the territory of Binyamin. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ravada says, Maiko Kashale, what's so difficult? Dilma Shechina B'chelek Binyamin, maybe the Shechina was in the portion of Binyamin. V'Sanhedrin Gedola B'chelek Yosef, and the great Sanhedrin was in the portion of Yosef. Midematzino bebeis olam, and we find this in the Beis Hamikdash. The Shechina bechelko shel Binyamin. The Shechina was in the territory of Binyamin. The Sanhedrin bechelek Yehuda, and the Sanhedrin was in the portion of Yehuda. So maybe it's the same thing when it comes to Shiloh. It was divided up between the tribe of Yosef and the tribe of Binyamin. And the Gemara continues. Amarlei said back to him, Hachi hashta, how can you make such a comparison? Hasam over there, Mekarva Nachlos Gabe Hadadi, the two territories are near one another. But over here, Mekarvan, are they near one another? And the Gemara says, Hachanami Mekarvan, here also they can be near one another. Kido Amar Rabbi Chama Rabbi Chanina, like Rabbi Chama Rabbi Chanina says, Ritzua Haisa Yotzes, there was a small strip of land that went out, Mechelko Shal Yehuda, from the territory of Yehuda, Venechneses Lechelko Shal Binyamin, which entered the territory of Binyamin, Uvahaya Mizbeach Bonin, it was there that the Mizbeach was built, Vahaya Binyamin Hatzadik Mitztara Lelaval, and Binyamin Hatzadik, he was agonizing over this, he wanted to take that piece of territory as well, and so we can say the same thing over here, Hachanami here also, Ritzua Haisa Yotzes Mechelko Shal Yosef Lechelko Shal Binyamin, there was a strip of land that went from the territory of Yosef to the territory of Binyamin. V'hainu dechsiv Tanas Shiloh, that's what's written in the pasuk, it says Tanas Shiloh, that's a reference to the fact that Binyamin was agonizing over the fact that he didn't have the entire Mishkan Shiloh in his territory. And Rashi explains, Chad b'ra havale l'chaylil v'lo miskin, one son Chaylil has and he's not proper. Nira be'enai, Rashi says, it seems to me, ki ovev shel Abaya Chaylil shemo, that the father of Abaya, his name was Chaylil. Mi mekarvan Shiloh gvul nachalas Binyamin, is the border of the territory of Binyamin, is that close to Shiloh. And again, the Gemara said that a strip of land went out in order to connect it. And Tanas Shiloh al Shahaya Binyamin misonin Allah, because Binyamin was moaning about it, he was agonizing over this fact. And the Gemara continues, Kitanoi, this issue of whether the Mishkan Shiloh was in the territory of Binyamin is actually a machlokas Tanoim in the following brisa. The pasuk says, Chofef olav covers him, Zem Mikdash Rishon, that's a reference to Mikdash Rishon, the first Beis HaMikdash. Kol Hayom, when it says in the pasuk, Kol Hayom, Zem Mikdash Sheni, that's a reference to the second Beis HaMikdash. Uvein Kseif of Shachin, and when the pasuk says, Uvein Kseif of Shachin, Elo Yemos HaMashiach, these are the days of Mashiach. In other words, the first time of this brisa is saying that the psukim in reference to Binyamin are a reference to Mikdash Rishon, Mikdash Sheni, and Yemos HaMashiach. In all of those time periods, the Shechina was in the territory of Binyamin, and not included in that is Mishkan Shiloh. Mishkan Shiloh was before Mikdash Rishon. And the Brisa continues, Rebbe says, Chofef Olav Zeh Olam Hazeh. The term Chofef Olav in the pasuk is Olam Hazeh. That means in the entire Olam Hazeh, this world, always the Shechina was residing with Binyamin, indicating Mishkan Shiloh was in the territory of Binyamin. And Kol Hayom, when the pasuk says Kol Hayom Elo Yemos HaMashiach, that refers to Yemos HaMashiach. Also, the Shechina was in the territory of Binyamin. Uvein Kseif of Shachin, Zeh Olam Haba. When it says Bein Kseif of Shachin, that's a reference to Olam Haba, that also over there, the Shechina was with Binyamin. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabban, and the sages taught in the Brisa, Yemei Oel Moed Shebe Midbar, Arboim Shana Chaser Achas, the Oel Moed in the Midbar, that was for 39 years. Yemei Oel Moed Shebe Gilgal, the amount of time of the Oel Moed in Gilgal, Arba Esrei, that was 14 years. Zayin Shekivshu v'Zayin Shechilku, that's 7 years that they conquered Eretz Yisrael, and 7 years they divided it up. Yemei Oel Moed Shebe Nova v'Givon, the amount of time of the Oel Moed in Nova and Givon, Chamishim v'Sheva, that's 57 years. Nishtayru l'Shilo, it comes out remaining for Shiloh, Gimel Meos v'Shivim Chaser Achas, it was 369 years. And the Gemara says, Yemei Oel Moed Shebe Midbar Arboim Chaser Achas, Again, the Brisa said that the amount of time of the Ol Moed in the Midbar was 39 years. Minolan, from where do we know that? The Yomar Maritz, because the master said, Shana Rishona Asa Moshe Es HaMishkan. The first year Moshe made the Mishkan. Shnia Hukam HaMishkan. In the second year in the Midbar, that's when the Mishkan was put up. Vishilach Moshe Meraglim, and that's when Moshe sent the Meraglim. And Shebegilgal Arba Esrei, in Gilgal it was 14 years. Sheva Shekivshu Vesheva Shechilku, 7 years of conquering and 7 years of dividing. Minolan, from where do we know that? And the Gemara says, Dekamar Kolev, because Kolev said, Ben Arboim Shana Anochi, Bishloach Moshe Eved Hashem Osi Mikodesh Barnea L'Ragel Esa'oretz. Kolev says, I was 40 years old when Moshe sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. Vashav also Davar Kasherim Levavi, and I returned. I responded with my report. Uchsivin, it's written, V'ato, and now, Hine Anochi Hayom, Ben Chomesh U'Shmonim Shana, now I'm 85 years old. Ki Ovrei L'Yardin Bar Kama Havan, now when he crossed the Yarden, how old was he at that time? Bar Shimon V'Tamni, he was 78 years old at that time. V'Komer Ben Chomesh U'Shmonim Shana, now he says that he was 85. Harei Sheva Shekivshu, that tells us that there are 7 years of conquering the land. V'Sheva Shechilku Minolan, and from where do we know that there are 7 years, that it took 7 years to divide the land? If you want, we can say, Midasheva Shekivshu Shevanami Shechilku, if it took 7 years to conquer, it probably took 7 years also to divide. And if you want, we could say, Midalo Mashkachas Lo Be'arba Esrei Shana Achar Asher Hukso Year. There's a pasuk in Yechezkel, it says 14 years after the city was struck. That's talking about 14 years after the Churban was a Yovel year, and as we'll see Rashi in a moment, the only way to come to that calculation is if you have 14 years of conquering and dividing the land. And Rashi explains, Nishtairu l'Shilo, there remains to Shiloh, Me'arba Meos Ushmonim Yetzias Mitzrayim Levinya Habayis. There's a total of 480 years from the time they left Mitzrayim till they built the Beis HaMikdash. And so if we deduct all the various times that we've listed in the Brisa, what remains for Shiloh is Shin Samech Tes. What remains is 369 years. Shnia Hukam HaMishkan, in the second year in the Midbar, that's when the Mishkan was put up. T'chsiv, as it's written in the Pasuk, Vahi Bashana Hashenis B'chodesh Harishon, it says it was in the second year. The Kamar Kolev, and Kolev is saying, B'shas Chiluk, at the time of division, Kishabo Litvo Chevron, what's happening in the Pasuk is he's claiming Chevron for himself, and so he says, Ben Memshana V'gomer, he says, I was 40 years old at that time, V'hoisa Hashana Hashniya, that was the second year in the Midbar, that he was sent as one of the spies, Nisakvu B'midbar Shuv Shloshim Ushmona Shana, now they were in the Midbar now for another 38 years, Nimsa Kolev Ben Ayin Ches Shanim Kishavro HaYardin, it turns out that Kolev is 78 years old when they crossed the Yarden. V'ko'amar b'shas chiluka ben chamesh u'shmonim shana, and he says at the time of the division that he's 85. Harei sheva nishtu l'kivush. So you see that there was 7 years for the conquering. And Rashi continues, midasheva kivshu sheva chilku, from the fact that they conquer for 7 years. So the division was probably 7 years. Svara bi'almahi. This is just a svara b'alma. It's just a logical idea. V'ba is saying, and if you want, we could say midalo eshkach yudal achar shehuk so'ir. Otherwise, you don't have 14 years after the city was struck. That's talking about 14 years after the Churban. You won't be able to understand the pasuk that's written in Yechezkel. Bi'arba esrei shana achar asher hukso year. It says 14 years after the city was struck. But Rosh Hashanah, that was on Rosh Hashanah. Shenemar be'osar lachodesh hayadvar Hashem elai, like it says in the pasuk. V'darshinan b'Meseches erchen, and we darshan in Meseches erchen. Eze hishana she Rosh Hashanah be'osar lachodesh. When do we find a year where Rosh Hashanah is on the 10th of the month as opposed to the 1st of the month? Haveyomer ze Yovel, that would be on a Yovel year. V'lomanu shmitin v'yovlos ela la'achar Yerusha v'yeshiva. They didn't start counting the Shemitah and Yovel years until after the inheritance and the settling of the land. V'chiamrit t'shnos kivush v'chiluk yud daled hayu. And if you're going to say that the years of kivush and chiluk were 14, umadlis lehu minyan hayovlos, and so then you'll take those away from the count of the Yovel years. Mashkachas lo decharav habayis b'shnas lamid vov liyovel. It's going to come out that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed at the 36th year of a Yovel year. V'havalei shnas hayovel shnas yud dalet shana. It's going to come out that the actual Yovel year is going to be 14 years achar shana shehuksa year, after the year that the city was struck, that again the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. V'ilo lo mashkachas lan. If you don't do that, if you don't deduct those 14 years, it's not going to come out that Yovel is going to be 14 years after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And Rashi continues, Ketzar Hauso, Vayhi b'shmonim shana v'dalid meos shana, Vayiven habayis laHashem. Again, it was 480 years from the time they left Mitzrayim that the Beis HaMikdash was built. Tzei mehen mem shahayu b'midbar, so subtract 40 years that they were in the wilderness, nimsa, so it would come out. Mishabo la'aretz ad shenivna habayis, from the time they entered Eretz Yisrael until the time that the Beis HaMikdash was built, arba meos v'arboim, that comes out to 440 years. V'habayis amad dalid meos v'eser, and the Beis HaMikdash itself, it stood for 410 years. The total of all that is Harei Ches Meos V'Chamishim. That's 850 years. Harei Yud Zayin Yovlos Shalemim. So that's exactly 17 Yovels. Tzemehen Yodalat Shekivshu V'Shechilku. Now, if we subtract the 14 years of conquering and dividing, Shalom Monu Yovlos, where they didn't count Yovel, Nimsa Bayis Chorav Kodem Hashlomas HaYovel Yodalat Shan. And comes out that the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed before the Yovel 14 years, and that works out with the pasuk. V'Hachi Tanya Behedya Be'erchin. This is the Bryce explicitly in Erchin Yud Zayin Yovlos Manu Yisrael Mishenichnesu La'aretz Ad Sheyatzu. There were 17 Yovels that Klal Yisrael counted from when they entered the land until they left. V'yata Yochel Omer Mishenichnesu Manu. Now you can't say they started counting from when they actually entered. Shimata Omer Kein Nimsa Bayis Char Betchilas HaYovel. Because again, if you're going to say that, it's going to come out the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed at the beginning of Yovel. V'yata Motzi Yud Dalet Shana Acharei Asher Huksoyer. You're not going to be able to fulfill the pasuk which said 14 years after the city was struck. Rather, you have to do like we said, deduct the 7 years of conquering and the 7 years of dividing. Then it comes out 14 years after the city was struck. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Oel Moed sheben Nov v'Givon chamishim v'sheva. The Oel Moed in Nov and Givon was for 57 years. Minolan, from where do we know this? Techsiv, because it's written in the pasuk by the death of Eli. It says, Vayhi kazkiro es Aaron hu Elokim. It was when he mentioned the Aaron of Hashem. V'tanen was taught, kishemeis Eli HaKohen, that when Eli HaKohen died, Chorva Shiloh, that's when Shiloh was destroyed. Ubo l'Nov, it was at that time that they came to Nov. And kishemeis Shmuel Haramasi, and when Shmuel Haramasi died, Chorva Nov, that's when Nov was destroyed, Uvo l'Givon, and they came to Givon. Uchsiv, and it's written, Vayhi yom sheves ha'aron b'kiryas Ya'arim, Vayirbu ha'yomim, Vayu esrim shana. It was from the day that the Aaron settled in Kiryas Ya'arim. It was a long time, it was 20 years. Vayino kol beis Yisrael acharei Hashem, and all of the house of Israel, they yearned after Hashem. Hani esrim shana, the calculation of these 20 years is as follows. Eser shana shemolach Shmuel bi'atzmo, was 10 years that Shmuel was king. V'shana shemolach Shmuel v'Shaul, there was 1 year that Shmuel and Shaul ruled together. Ushtayim shemolach Shaul, and then 2 years that Shaul was king. V'sheva de David, and the 7 years of David. And that refers to the 7 years of David ruling in Hebron. And Rashi explains, Charva Nov al Yedei Shaul, Nov was destroyed through Shaul, B'Kiryas Ya'arim, and then the Aron was in Kiryas Ya'arim, Sham Nasnu L'Sof Zayin Chadashim. They placed it there after 7 years, Shamad B'Sad de Plishtim. It was in the field of the Plishtim for 7 years, then it went to Kiryas Ya'arim. Shenemar, as it says in the Pasuk, V'tichbad Yad Hashem Elo Ashtodim V'achziru B'Agol Chadasha. They returned it in a new wagon, V'Nasnu Sham, and they placed it there. V'Yasa Sham Esrim Shana, was there 20 years. At Sheviu David Misham B'Shana Rishona Shanasa Melech Al Kol Yisrael, until David brought it from there in the first year that he was king over all of Klal Yisrael. Shishana Shminis Lamalchu Al Yehuda, that was the 8th year of his kingship over Yehuda. And Rashi continues, Hachi Garsinan Asara de Shmuel Atzmo, there was the 10 years of Shmuel by himself. Shayesh Shofet Levado Mishemes Eli at Shamolach Shaul, he was the judge alone from the time that Eli died until Shaul became king. Uve Meseches Tmura Hachi Garsinan La Meseches Tmura, the gears of the text is as follows. Eser Shanim Shemolach Shmuel Liatzmo. Again, Shmuel was king for 10 years by himself. Diosa Shana Shashalu Lahem Melech. The year that they asked for a king, he Shana Asiris LaShmuel. That was the 10th year of Shmuel, Haramasi. V'Shana Achas Molchu Shmuel V'Shaul Yachad. There was 1 year where Shmuel and Shaul ruled together. Shaya Shaul Holech Achar Atzas Shmuel. That simply means that Shaul would follow the advice of Shmuel Ad Shesarach B'Maise Agag, until he committed the Aveira with the incident of Agag. V'Sar Shmuel Mayalav, and that's when Shmuel turned away from him. Kidduchsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, V'lo Yosef Shmuel Liro, says Shaul. Shmuel no longer saw Shaul. Umalach Shuv Shaul Shtei Shanim. Then Shaul was king for another 2 years. V'hein Shekasav B'Mikru Shtei Shanim Molach Al Yisrael. That's what it says in the pasuk. 2 years king over Klal Yisrael. To Lo Chashav Osam D'Molach Shmuel B'Adei, not counting the year that he was together with Shmuel. V'hainu Damina B'Meseches Tainus. That's what we say in Meseches Tainus. Migoram L'Shaul Sheyashav B'Giva Shtei Shanim U'Mechsa Tfilaso Shel Shmuel B'Rama. What caused Shaul that he would stay and give 2.5 years? That was the prayer of Shmuel. Because in the half of the first year is when he committed the Avera. V'nigzra olav misa, and he was supposed to die immediately. Elisha amdalo tefillah Shmuel, but the prayer of Shmuel was able to protect him. V'sheva shamalach David bechevron, and then add in the 7 years of David in Chevron al Yehuda, when he ruled over Yehuda. Ulikashem lichua kol Yisrael, and then when he became king over all of Klal Yisrael aleim, over them. Hevi as Aron min Kiryas Yearim ir David harayesrim. That's when they brought the Aron from Kiryas Yearim to the city of David. That's a total of 20, and again, that's going to add up to a total of 57. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Yud Tes Amud Aleph.